Welcome and thank you for joining us for the second half hour of The Factor Uncensored. It's one thing to have a dry spell and not having any sex, but what about people who are intentionally, with choice, keeping their bedroom closed off? Singer Lenny Kravitz, many of you know him, recently revealed he practices celibacy. He says he hasn't been in a serious relationship in 9 years, and he won't be having sex with anyone until he meets the right person. He also said no sex in 9 years. Joining us to talk about this, Demetrius Walker, who doesn't believe in long-term celibacy, along with Docs and Candace Love, who both practice celibacy. So what is your concern? And it's my understanding you tried it before. Tell me a little bit about what you tried and why you're not a true believer in celibacy.
Well, I didn't volunteer celibacy. Kind of was not my choice.
That's a damn dry spell. Tell the truth. That's life. That's life.
But, I found that it's very important, as you know, for men, especially with prostate cancer being a big thing, especially for African-American men, that we make sure that we're practicing that muscle. And so, for that reason, I find it, relevant or necessary to stay active.
Okay. And so what was it like for, I think you said, our producer said 70 days or?
Yeah,
was it 7 days? I mean, what?
Well, I would prefer.
There's a big difference.
I prefer it to be 7 days, but yeah, it was between 2 and 3 months. Yeah, it was the longest
And what was
time.
that like for you?
Man, well, I was able to get in the gym a lot more and, put up a lot more on the bench.
Look at that strength.
Yeah, so, I can't say it had bad results. Yeah.
And so, Docs and Candace, you both went down that path, and still you practice it from time to time.
Yeah.
What was the appeal to practice it for both of you?
Well, for me, initially, it had a lot to do with mental health. Also, I had a lot of physical ailments. I was suffering from kidney failure. At that point, I had went blind in my left eye, and I was pretty much at my personal version of rock bottom. And I stumbled onto the science via a friend of mine. Shout out to my brother, Honest Yoga, a professional energy worker in Atlanta. And he kind of directed me towards the path, and initially I was skeptical. But I was coming out of a relationship where I wasn't willing to continue to engage with my ex at that time. But I also started to understand energy too much to just call randoms through, if you will. And I ended up in that space for about 3 to 4 months, and I ended up going to a spiritual retreat where I was told that in the ancient times, the men who wanted to take this practice seriously, they would withhold their seed for 12 months. And we would kind of garner the same energy that women do every lunar cycle. Still was kind of skeptical, but I went through with it, and at the end of the 12 months, my kidney started to heal, my vision started to heal. I started to discover my purpose, which has been teaching meditation and been a counselor for
Now,
the past
were there
7
any
years.
other treatments? Because we want to make sure the viewer knows, don't just go into celibacy and it's going to cure you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Were there any other treatments that you had that may have helped the process?
Absolutely. My physicians and things of that nature, I still credit them with what they was able to contribute to the process, but in a lot of ways, they were stumped as far as what was going on with my kidney. So as I started to practice this and I would come back and they would see my numbers, they would ask me, what are you doing? Because we couldn't really figure this out. So of course they contributed, but a lot of it was me being able to redirect my flow of energy. And that's kind of the thing as far as prostate. You hear that a lot, and that's a concern for a lot of men, which I understand. But a lot of people don't realize when you go into these long bouts of celibacy, you have to know how to actually redirect the flow of energy. This has to do with things like Tai Chi, Qigong, somatic therapy. It's a lot of different attributes that have to be employed to do it healthily and responsibly.
All right, Candace, let's bring you into the conversation. So you have practiced it with Docs. So what took you down that path, and were there any benefits?
Yeah, so I practiced celibacy before I met my husband. I was 4 years celibate before I met my husband, and he was as well. So my journey in celibacy was, typically you'll see that people will journey into it for religious purposes, or because it's something, like he said, it wasn't his choice. But when you become extremely intentional in your emotional healing practice, I'm an intuitive emotional healing therapist. So when you become very intentional about your healing practice and you become desperate to feel better, to find peace, to have a level of joy and true happiness that doesn't exist on outside sources or outside pleasure, because when a person is deeply unhappy, they find pleasure in anything outside of themselves, including sexual experiences. So what I needed to do was find that level of love, attention that I was looking for from other people, men, to make me feel better or feel whole. I had 4 years of only giving that to myself. So when I'm able to meet my husband, I don't need him to love the wounds that I have because I can love them myself. I don't need to use his love as medication on my wounds to make me feel better because I've had 4 years of practicing. And also, one thing when people speak about celibacy, they think that it means that they are not having sexual experiences with outside people, but they'll still masturbate. This means an intentional practice of reiterating real energy in the body and sending it to the parts of yourself that may have traumatic experiences, maybe a mother wound, a father wound, and really learning how to heal yourself.
All right. We want to thank you both. Great job. Thank you all for sharing that experience with us here on The Factor Uncensored.